Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Off the Fence. This is, you know it by now, your go-to weekly jumps programme, and I am joined week in, week out by two of the best names in the business, Tony Keenan and Barry Geraghty, and we luckily have BoyleSports with us to work in association on this show. Before you go any further, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel where I'm pointing right now. Just hit subscribe and then you won't miss a single episode of Off the Fence, and you wouldn't want to because it's a very good show, even if I do say so myself. And Tony Keenan, you will concur with those thoughts, surely.
Oh, absolutely. I just better do a quick correction from last week, just as putting some misinformation out there about the handicapping of novices and things like that. It's actually only 3 runs required for the Fred Winter. That's the standard thing, not the 4th that I mentioned last week. This was definitely a good example of, that one, Cunningham's Law, where the easiest way to get the right answer to something on the internet is to say something wrong. A few people went along pulling my ears in. Fair play to them. I have to admire their enthusiasm for the Fred Winter in the middle of January. That's dedication to the cause.
Well, it's equal dedication from you to come on and do a fast correction, and that's why we're the best show in the business, because nothing gets through the net, and even if it does, we go back and correct it. Barry, how are you? You made no mistakes last week. Perfect Barry as always.
Well, I'm not owning up to any corrections needed, Vesta, but I'm sure there's been plenty all season and maybe even last week.
Well, fingers crossed we have another perfect show, guys. Unfortunately, we missed out on a lot of racing courtesy of the weather. Very disappointing, and all the jumps action we're going to be looking at was over in Ireland, and we're going to start off on Sunday's thurles card when we look back on what happened where, and we're going to kick off with Allegorie De Vassy, the mare who lots of you will have seen on social media, made that absolutely horrific blunder at the first fence before going on to win at odds of 1-8, I think it was. She went off in the end for a grade 2, not exactly very competitive, and she made a good few, not everyone was impressed with her jumping, not only with that mistake, but obviously she's not that straight either, Tony. Watching on, now that she's even shorter, she's 6-4 with BoyleSports for the Mare's Chase at the festival. I think most people are surely now starting to think she's short enough even after winning.
Yeah, I would think so. I think thurles possibly didn't suit her with the layout of the track. Thurles is quite an unusual layout. There's sort of 6 fences in tight sort of concentration there on one half of the track, and then there's probably only 1 fence on another half of the track. They've taken out one in the straight there, we got downhill, it was causing a lot of fallers. Maybe she lost concentration, maybe she wasn't going fast enough. But no, overall I would agree that her jumping would be a fairly sizable worry. She was completely unpressured there in the lead, which almost certainly isn't going to be the case at Cheltenham. She's going to be up against, I would say, 2 very solid 150 mares from Ireland anyway, in Impervious and Scarlet and Dove. I'd be fairly happy that they are that type of mark. Now, she might have more brilliance than them, like she was really strong at the line there on Sunday. There's bags of ability, but the jumping is suspect. I think she's been, all 4 of her Irish starts have now been right-handed. I think she's inclined to go that way when she was in France as well. So yeah, it's going to be a very interesting race. I know our friend and colleague Kevin Blake has been having a bit of a cut at the mares' races on the website, and fair points made and all that, but I actually have to admit that I'm quite a fan of these races. For purely selfish reasons, I actually do like to bet on them. I think they're quite good betting mediums. I have a little bit of joy in them, thank God, over the years. I'd also be taking the point of view that a lot of these mares wouldn't actually be in training only for this programme of horses. I think the Mare's Chase has served up a couple of very good races. Ellie May versus Colreevy the first year, and then Ellie May, fighting out to beat the 2 outsiders last year. Mare's Hurdles have always been an interesting race, I think. And this year, maybe bar the Cuvée years, it could be a little bit dull, but this year's Mare's Chase, I think this is a fascinating race with the potential what Allegorie De Vassy may or may not do with her little bit of a lack of self-preservation. The 2 solid horses, Zambella looks better than ever. So yeah, I think it's a decent race. I think it's been well worth having.
Yeah, look, I'm with you. I think we mentioned it last week. It looks like it could be a very, very competitive race at the festival. Barry, like I said, she's 6-4 with BoyleSports currently, but that price is set to be price boosted by BoyleSports. So please, viewers, keep an eye out for that. She's at the top of the market, and as Tony's touched upon there, she probably has the brilliance, maybe, and the real sort of top-notch engine. But in terms of putting it all together on the day, she's up against horses who are accurate jumpers, have more experience than her, jump straighter than her. I think there are loads of question marks about her.
Oh, definitely. She is a brilliant mare, and she does have a good jump. She's a lot of scope, but her technique, she just has a little bit of work to do on it. Willie mentioned after the race that with the frost they hadn't got to give her a pop at home, and a lot of that, just a lack of practice, might have affected her at the first. Paul, she is keen, so Paul would have ridden her on a slack rein, if you like. He wouldn't have had a tight hold of her head because he wanted to relax. So I'd say that lack of connection on the reins, by being so relaxed on her, might have just left her a little bit in two minds. She guessed at the first and ducked out to right. Going out to right isn't going to be a help, especially against more experienced opposition. And Tony, I know he's sweet on Scarlet and Dove. She's had 15 runs over fences. So you can imagine Scarlet and Dove breathing down her neck, applying pressure, and mares, Ellie May, the same thing as well, with so much experience taking this mare on. It's going to be a struggle for her. I think it's not going to be. I can't imagine she'd be out in front. I'd imagine they'd be happy to try and take a lead and ride her like a novice and protect her. But I would really worry for her for the level of experience she has. I think she's very vulnerable.
Yeah, I think I concur with those thoughts, Barry. Let's stick with you as we talk about what was the old Kinloch Bray, now the Horse and Jockey Club. Horton Cologne ended up falling at the last when looking like winning. Some people say Fakir D'Oudairies, who was the eventual winner, may have got up at the line, but I think that's maybe clutching at straws for me anyway. It looked like the winner fell at last to my eye. And now Fakir is now 7-1 for the Ryanair, obviously with BoyleSports again. I mean, the connection seemed to be saying that he's only going to go there if Allaho doesn't, maybe sort of something along those lines anyway. Would you expect to see him at Cheltenham, or do you think we'll see him at Ascot and then Aintree maybe?
He possibly go to Ascot, obviously, which he won last year. But if they're going to wait to see if Allaho doesn't turn up, it might be declarations before anyone knows that for sure. But Allaho, I'm sure, would benefit from a run before Cheltenham. So maybe if you're to take him on knowing it's his first start, it might be a little bit easier. But judging the race at the weekend in Thurles, I don't think that Thurles really suits Fakir D'Oudairies. He's a horse who stays well over that trip. I think it's a little bit sharp. It often isn't very soft, and it wasn't very soft on Sunday. Huyton Cologne ran over 2 miles around the Arkle last season, has a good bit of pace, but was beaten 16 lengths in the Arkle. So if you're to consider him for the Ryanair, that's a big step up from what he did last year. He was 19 lengths behind Galopin Des Champs in the John Durkan as well. So he has a bit of form to find at this level. But I think the track played to his strengths, not to Fakir D'Oudairies. So if you were to pick a horse from this race going forward for the Ryanair, it'll be Fakir D'Oudairies.
Yeah, with the other horse having to be supplemented too, which seems kind of unlikely maybe with all the other horses in the same yard. Tony, how did you see the race playing out? Do you believe any of this chat that Fakir might have got up?
I'd say it was odds against. I wouldn't rule it out completely, but concur what Barry said there. Thurles didn't really play to Fakir's strengths nor the ground. As Joseph also said after that, he probably takes a little bit more work now that he's gotten older. And like that, I'm sure Willie Mullins will be keeping Allaho in the race for as late as possible, if only to scare the likes of Fakir off with a view to running his other horses. I was quite impressed with the faller. I thought he has been a horse of potential, I think, really since his juvenile days. Like, he pitched up in the Triumph Hurdle with no preparation and ran third, very good run. And then in Punchestown, I think Paul Townend hit the front of it a week too soon on him. In the Punchestown equivalent of the Triumph, he was much the best horse that day. And then he kind of got fast-tracked into the Irish Arkle last February, fell early, fast-tracked then into the Arkle. 2 miles never really his thing, I'd say. Juvenile hurdlers often want a bit further. I thought on Sunday he travelled really well. It was the best he travelled. I'd seen him since maybe his beginner's chase, which was again a bit of a nothing race. And he jumped better than he has done. I thought it was a really good performance out of him, and the back them, he was really strong in the market. Like, he was 20s, 25s in the betting open. What, he go off 6 or 7 to 1. It was anticipated to my mind anyway. Now the problem, of course, is he has no entries in any chases at Cheltenham, which is really bizarre. He's this
especially for a yard who enter plenty of races. It seems very odd indeed.
Yeah, it maybe they don't really think an awful lot of him. Maybe he's only sparked the last while. I don't know. Other pointers from the race, it obviously the performance of the faller and the eventual winner would be a boost to Gallop in the Champ. Chacun Pour Soi, his jumping seems to have gone a little bit sideways. He's actually skewing a lot of fences. I thought he did it a little bit in Leopardstown. He did it over the first few in Taurus. Willie Mullins commented on a pre-race that his jumping wasn't what it was, and then he's just looked like a blatant non-stayer, a horse with some sort of physical issue, so he'd be hard to fancy for anything at the moment. Just want to mention Lifetime Ambition there. Jessica Harrington's going through quite a poor run at the moment. I think she's only had 2 winners now since kind of mid-October, flat and jumps, 2 from 52, something like that. But yeah, it's a muddy kind of picture because there's a lot of kind of moving pieces in terms of where horses might or might not run. So yeah, but like Barry said, I would be a little bit concerned about Allaho going into this Ryanair off the back of no run. There isn't really another race from the Red Mills in Gowran will be the only one. I don't think Willie Mullins will want to run a horse so quickly out of Cheltenham. He's never been a horse. I know he won first time out last year, but Staring for Lunge probably would have beaten him in the John Dork, and at least would have been close. So, and it's one thing going in fresh in November, December, even January time, but like a lot of these horses will have had 1, 2, 3 runs beforehand. So yeah, a little bit vulnerable, perhaps as vulnerable as he's ever been going to this race.
Yeah, if he lines up and they have him there fit and well, but it's his first run of the season, it's going to be absolutely fascinating. Let's focus in on a couple of other, you guessed it, Willie Mullins horses that have jumped to the top of anti-post markets for the festival, including Tony Embassy Gardens, who won also at Thurles at the weekend. Lots of people got a bit overexcited about this performance, but then there were plenty of horses in behind that didn't perform. He's now 8 to 1 with BoyleSports for the Albert Bartlett off the back of this, so right up at the top of the betting for that novice race. Were you taken with him or not so much?
Look, he won very easily. As you mentioned, they're very little in behind again. Gordon Elliott not really going that well at the moment. I think since New Year's Day, 1 from 41, something like that. His 2 were very disappointing. So really, he had very little to beat. Barry Oliver McKieran horse was quite lowly rated. I'm not really a fan of this Embassy Gardens. I thought he threw it in completely in Cork against a horse that wouldn't be too genuine, and it's what unites us. He was flashing the tail. But the big takeaway from this was that Good Land just beat him endless. All ends up at Leopardstown at Christmas. A good form boost for him. I think he's a horse to be interested in for Dublin Racing Festival and for Cheltenham, definitely.
Okay, so form boost angle rather than Embassy Gardens himself. And Barry, will come to you for a bit of Navan action, looking at the bumper. It's, for me, another for the Mullins team, has jumped to the top of the market for the champion bumper at the Cheltenham Festival after dotting up on his first rule start, obviously following on from winning in his point-to-point. He's now 4 to 1 for the bumper with BoyleSports, and it wasn't going to be long before this time of year before a Mullins horse did something very, very easily and jumped to the 4 of that market. But do you think that he'll still be at the 4 of it come Cheltenham?
It was a good performance. I thought he quickened really well. It showed a lot of natural pace. Patrick seemed pretty pleased with him too afterwards as well. The 4th horse run for Harry was 3rd behind Better Days Ahead and Chapeau de Soy in Farious and their bumper. And you'd have to say that it's time for me, or should I say it's for me, was more impressive against him anyway. So no, you'd have to say visually very smart performance, and the vibes were good as well.
Yeah, I would. I mean, visually, everyone seems to be pretty blown away by him. Tony, over to you for a couple of other performances at Navan. We'll start with HMS Seahorse for the Nolan Yard. Good to see him back in the winner's enclosure. He's now 12s with BoyleSports for the Coral Cup. Would you have any interest in him?
Look, not at the moment, but I wouldn't have interest in him for these good handicap hurdles coming up. I thought this could be quite a good race as a guide to those races. Paul Nolan mentioned before the race, but gelding HMSC horse, and it had improved his jumping. Well, I suppose it would if Birch was rubbing up against your sensitive parts every time you jumped the hurdle. It might sharpen you up a little bit, because he really wasn't a great jumper as a juvenile, but he was pretty good here on Saturday. Also, but he was really disappointing now in Galway. Like, I think a lot of people, probably myself, had him in mind for a Galway hurdle, and then he turns up in the kind of 4-year-old only novice on the first day of the meeting, and just runs terrible. But Paul Nolan went through a really quiet spell then, so you can probably forget about that. So it was a good performance out of him. I thought Felix Desgy actually did quite well to be second, considering the bad mistake he made when moving into it 4 out, but like, he's Felix Desgy, so he's probably not going to repeat it the next time. Rebel Ivy, really good performance actually from her out in third. She beat Queensbrook and Heaven Help Us in Limerick back on Munster National Day, and it looked like a false bit of form. Maybe Queensbrook wasn't ready, but she fully backed up her new mark, and this was a very promising effort off a break, because the trainer said she'd met a setback, so I'd be expecting her to improve. She travelled very well into it, just kind of flattened out after the last, and I thought Lucky Max probably got there far too soon, hitting the front 3 out, but Rebel Ivy was probably the one I was really taking with here.
Okay, a few takeaways from that race then. And what about Marla Mission? We've got to give him a mention, Tony, given that you tipped him up at 33s for the National Hunt Chase at the festival in your anti-post piece. And now he's got off the mark very impressively over fences at the 3rd time of asking, having put up good efforts before this as well. I mean, it's a stupid question really, but I guess you're very, very, very happy sat on 33-1 for that race, considering he's now, 12s for the race at the festival?
Well, I would have been happy if he'd just fallen in on Saturday, because I'd mainly backed him for Saturday's race, but I was really impressed with him. I thought he was visually excellent. The time was guts of 11.5 seconds quicker than the handicap chase later on the card. I think I'd like to give credit to trainer and jockey as well. Thought Ben Harvey was good in him. He was kind of down the inside on the first circuit, but he got him out to the outside. Never over-asked him at a fence. He jumped very efficiently. I think the one half mistake, maybe 2 out. Also, John McConnell deserves a bit of credit as well. This horse went over to Cheltenham for the Chemical Energy race in November, at the time when the yard were flying. He was just really disappointing. Didn't jump at all. But he had a breathing operation after that. I thought Punchestown was a nice kind of almost a prep run. They dropped him out for the first time ever in over hurdles or over fences. It got him jumping, finished out his race, and different horse here on Saturday, really strong at the line. Look, anti-post betting I think has been difficult this year. There's a lot going on. It's factoring into that. Like Willie Mullins holding a lot of the aces, or even all the aces in these novice races, is a big part of it. The overall thinness of races is part of it. I also think like punters are sometimes maybe willing to take very short prices about horses. Like, no need for bookmakers to be laying horse at 5-2 if people will take, I don't know, 6-4 or 7-4, but things like that. But the National Hunt Chase is maybe an interesting anti-post race. It's one of these where I've kind of taken the view that maybe Gaillard de Many isn't going to run. He may well run, but I was taking the view this time last week that maybe he wouldn't. Marla Mission was one that had a little bit of upside. Hopefully he'll get there. All going well. He also did run well in the Albert Bartlett last year, up and down the inside probably wasn't ideal. So yeah, hopefully he'd have a bit of a chance. I think those type of races are worth looking out for anti-posts at the moment. I think the Turners was another good example of that about a fortnight ago. I was on about James de Burley and that. I still think he's okay, but I'm just wondering, am I after landing on the right one in that? I think Barry mentioned appreciated. I think the market support for him since would suggest that he's stepping up and trip. But again, like last year, it just looks like it could be a very small field race. Probably dominated by the middle distance Irish horses.
But just one last question before we move on from Marla Mission, Tony. Now that he's 12-1 with BoyleSports, and by the way, viewers, that price is set to be boosted, so keep an eye out for that. But he's currently 12s in the anti-post market for the race that you've backed him at 33s. Would you still be advising him? Would you still fancy him at 12s off the back of what he did at the weekend?
Probably, obviously not as much, but I definitely give him a life at that kind of price if you're expecting the favourite not to pitch up. And Chemical Energy wouldn't really be a horse that I'd like, because the race that he won in Cheltenham fell apart a little bit. This horse disappointed, and Henry de Bromhead's horse did too. I think the other one that's interesting in this is Churchstone Warrior. He went down the inside in the Gaillard de Many race at Christmas, which was no good to anyone, and definitely looks like a horse that would have potential to be improving for going up to 3 mile 6 if he can hold his jumping together. But yeah, this could turn up to be the really weak race if the favourite doesn't turn up. And also the fact that a lot of these horses are going to be in a tight window to get qualified between now and then. I saw someone post up, I think it was Matt Toombs on Twitter, that I think less than 50% of them are qualified. They have to have that placed effort over 3 miles. So, you know, a couple of meetings get called off between now and then. It's leaving it very tight.
Wow, that's very interesting. Barry, we should bring you back in because another anti-post horse that you've given a shout to this time around, Gaelic Warrior, bolted up at Clonmel. 1-14, I think he won at another, you know, nice tasty price, not. But he was your selection for the Ballymore quite early on, and he's now 5-1 for that race with BoyleSports. I mean, look, he absolutely bolted up when we last saw him, but at 5-1, is he short enough for a race like that?
I wouldn't think so. I think he's out. I think it's a winnable race. He's rated 149 now. But it was a good performance in Clonmel. It's what you would have expected. Obviously, he has form on soft ground, and it was no issue to him. I suppose the slight negative you would take is the fact he's going fractionally to his right at times. But for me, to counteract against that is when you step up and trip, things aren't happening as fast. You have a little bit more comfort. You're not under as much pressure. So I don't feel that that would be exaggerated. It won't be ideal going left-handed if you're jumping fractionally to your right. But I think with the level of experience he has now at this stage compared to last year, Paul Townend could tuck him in second row, get a bit of cover, get something on your outside, should keep him a little bit straighter. So I think, although it's a slight negative, I think it's one he can overcome. And even in the short term, he could be a horse who find himself in the Betfair Hurdle. A race is in at 149. Might enter yours won it 10 years ago off 149 as novice as well. It'll be a strong handicap, but he's definitely one who's worth having on side, I think.
Okay, still very positive about him, and now the renamed Barrymore, as I've just called the Ballymore. I think it suits the race perfectly. Barry, what about you, Tony? Gaelic Warrior, we might see him in the Betfair Hurdle. It's caused quite a lot of controversy, the fact they ran him, and you know that he might still go to the Betfair Hurdle. Where are you at with this horse that seems to be sort of, causes a lot of chat, this individual?
Yeah, understandably with the profile he came into the Fred Winthrop last year, the French form, and him potentially being well in. I'm a little bit, maybe a lot negative with this horse. His 2 Irish races this year have been a little bit non-events. Tramore, he did a quite decent time. Time in Clonmel was very ordinary. Wouldn't read too much into that because all the kind of races on the card seem to be slowly run. But the negatives will be, he got beaten off, what was it? A 129 English mark in the Fred Winter last year. 129, and he's gone to 149 now for very, very little, I would say. He had 9 hurdles in the Fred Winter last year. He was straight at the first one. There was a horse on his outside. He was right at, and markedly so, at the next 8. I'd say he was very well positioned in the Fred Winter. He was definitely in the right spot. Very hard race to come from off the pace there. He poleaxed Brazil, I think, at the second or third, who eventually won it. I think he hit him another dunt then coming to 3 out. Again, so Brazil wasn't advantaged by that. Brazil was giving him £8. He's good, but he's not, I don't think anybody fancies him when he's pitching up in a Ballymore. He's a bit of a chance, but so that was a fair negative. And the other possibly bigger negative, like, why did Willie Mullins not run him a Nace? Wouldn't be a man for leaving grade 1s behind. I know he won it anyway. Does that suggest he's third in the pecking order behind Champ Cayley and Grange Clare West? That should be raising a little bit of red flags for me. So I think left-hand is going to be a worry for him. The old course, maybe he's on the new course, he might be a bit better, be able to get away with it, but the old course might test him out a bit. Both his potential handicap targets now are also going to be left-handed. The race in Dublin Racing Festival or the Betfair. So yeah, I don't know. I just like to see him actually prove it. I think there's a lot of hype there and visually good the last twice, but is there really substance to it? I don't know. Okay,
more than I was going to say, like you said there, Tony, a red flag around Gaelic Warrior, but I'm going to call it bunting, given everything that you've just flagged up there in regards to him. What about Night and Day? She put down the mare's novice marker when we saw her this week. She's now 6-1 with BoyleSports for that contest at the Cheltenham Festival. Tony, you want to start with her? Is she something that you would like as a profile for this race?
Yeah, she was all right. I know she's an all right profile. I think one thought he had after is Willie Mullen said he was keen to get another run into her. Now, he does not make many mistakes, but I'd be adamant he made a mistake with Dino Blue in this race last year. He didn't give her another run before Cheltenham. Her inexperience caught her completing the down run. That's pocket talk, but I still think it's right. Night and Day, she was actually a bit of a talking horse for this race last year. There was talk of her running in it first time out over hurdles, and I think she might actually been balloted out of it because this race would always attract the full field. She won very, very easily in Clonmel. She was really strong in the market. Thought her hurdling wasn't particularly good. She looks massive. She was dwarfing the rest, and Paul Townend mentioned her being a chaser afterwards. I also thought halfway down the back straight she started to hold her tail in a very funny fashion. Yeah, not say a red flag, more of a yellow flag there, but didn't look at it. Very hard to say now. Was she doing anything weird in the straight because there was shade and very hard to see? But yeah, she's pretty skinny now for that race. I actually think Gordon Elliott might well have the winner of that. Don't ask me which one, because he's actually got loads of them. Harmonia Maker and Liberty Dance and Hackadoo Tabert. So we'll possibly find out a little bit more about those at the weekend, but Fairyhouse holding a graded race for those type of mares.
Okay, Barry, quick word for you on Night and Day.
Yeah, she was visually impressive. She was very good, but the mare in second, Apples and Water, she was 22 lengths behind her. She's been beaten 38 lengths and 40 lengths on her two previous starts, so I don't think it was the strongest contest. Jumping can definitely improve, but she can do no more than she did, but she didn't have to do much.
Okay, didn't have to do much, like many of these Mullins horses quite recently, it would seem. Before we go any further and look ahead to the week that is coming up, do not forget, everyone, to download the At The Races app. I'm sure most of you have already, including Barry and Tony, obviously, and myself. And on that app, you can get expert tips, you can get replays, you can bet on the app, cards, results, everything you want, articles and news, it's all on there, and you can watch Sky Sports Racing live too. So download it, it's an absolute no-brainer. It's the best racing app around, and I'm not just saying that. Let's look ahead to the coming up week. We have Gowran Park and the Thyestes meeting, a race meeting that everyone loves, Thyestes Chase, and in this we have Franco de Port, Pentalful of Laird, Ascaria 10, some old favourites in there. Tony, we'll start with you for this race. Has anything at this stage jumped out at you as the potential winner?
Yeah, it has, yeah. Punitive. I just talked about some of the fancied ones there at the top of the market there at the moment. I'm not sure it's the strongest version of the race. There's a lot of horses that ran in it last year who are quite prominent in the betting. Deal Care and Franco de Port. Both of those are higher in the weights now. Franco de Port was kind of fourth in a 3-horse race a little bit in the Savage Chase at Leopardstown. I don't think there was any real depth in behind. Very impressive winner, or quite impressive winner, Conflated. Deal Care, he's a stone higher, which is a big ask. I thought he had the benefit of racing on the outside in the Paddy Power. If there was one to come out of last year's race, I think a horse myself and Barry were both quite keen on last year, Ascaria 10. He came into the race last year. I know he was only 8, but he travelled well. He moved up probably at the time, and the pace was very strong. He'd always be a horse that would need a run. He didn't have a run last year. He does have a run this year. So of the front ones, he'd be the one I'd be keen on. But the one I'm more so interested in is Punitive. Quite an unusual horse. Bought very cheaply, I think, at Doncaster by Gordon Elliott out of Henry de Bromhead's ex-Jigginstown horse. Did all his racing kind of over 2.5 when with the Bromhead. But I always thought he looked like a 3-mile. Gordon Elliott's Optimum Trip. He's at 3 goes over 3 miles plus. He unseated early enough in the Tri-Town, but he ran a really good race at Cheltenham, I'd say, on ground that was quick enough, quite solid piece of form that, and then he went and won the Porterstown at Fairyhouse. I thought things just didn't go quite his way in that race. He could kind of shuffle back on the run to 3 out, meant he had to kind of circle the field, come stand side, but he made up an awful amount of ground from kind of the turn in to the lead at the last, and kind of won well, stayed well. He's had a break since then. I'd say that's probably a good idea because he had a busy period. This race kind of the target, coming back half a mile in trip, but it's scoring. It's 3 mile 1. It's going to be soft. I'd say at absolute best looking at the forecast. So I think he's got a chance of hitting the frame anyway.
Okay, bigger priced horse as well as the more fancied individual. Barry, what about you in the Thyestes? How many times did you win the Thyestes?
Thanks, Vanessa. Actually, no, never won the Thyestes. Another one that got away, I suppose. Interesting. Tony pointed out Gary at 10. He's definitely one with a chance. Second to Durasso when giving him £6 in thurles. But you'd have to have a little question mark over the form of Gordon's horses, as Tony mentioned earlier. But for me, I thought Franco de Port, only 7 lengths behind Conflated at Christmas. That was a very good run. He was 29 lengths behind Galvin last year in the same race before running Longhouse Poet close in the Thyestes last year. I didn't think he'd get anywhere near the trip in the Thyestes, but he did, and the ground was plenty soft that day. I'd agree with Tony. I thought it was a stronger race last year than this year. He's £4 higher, and for me, he's a Grade 1 winner, and I think he just has that level of class above the rest. So I'd be happy to stick with Franco de Port.
Okay, sticking with the class angle, Barry will stick with you for a quick mention for the Galmoy Hurdle. Tiupu in here looking to have his prep for Cheltenham and the Stayers Hurdle bid, and that's obviously a wide open event, as we often talk about on this show. What are we expecting from him at Gowran?
Well, he's stepping up on trip. He's a 6-year-old. It's his first time over 3 mile. He was really good when he beat Classical Dream in the Hatton's Grace over 2.5 on very soft ground as well. And he hit the line like a horse who was going to have no problem getting further. So first step, stepping up on trip. It'll be interesting. But I think he's a horse with lots of potential as a stayer. So he's going to be hard to beat here. Maybe Longhouse Poet could be the one to chase him home. Who's ridden with plenty of confidence on soft ground in Limerick at Christmas. He'd have a bit to find with him, but he might be the one to trouble him. Or Durasso, who has struggled to get this trip in the past, but I think Tiupu will be very hard to beat, and he's a horse who might be just heading his way towards the stairs.
Are we confident he's going to stay, Tiupu, Tony?
I know he'll be better. He'll be better over this trip. He's looked like he was crying out for this all along. I've backed him for the stayers. I'm not necessarily suggesting anyone else listening backs him, because there are questions at Cheltenham about him effectiveness of the track and the ground been good, but I just think he might have the most ability of any horse in the stayers hurdle. 2 miles just way too sharp from all throughout his career, and when soft ground come into play at 2 miles, he would look really good like he did in the Red Mills trial last year. As a backer off him for Cheltenham, I actually kind of would have preferred if he went for the buying hurdle and built up to it gradually, but I thought his Fairy House performance looking back was a really good effort. Like, beating a fresh Classical Dream is very good, and if Honeysuckle ran anyone near our best, it has to be an impressive performance. Stayers hurdle, like, obviously wide open race this year. I see a few quid for Blazing Cal there in the last couple of days. Just today, shush, yeah. There's a bit of interest starting out for him now again. No entry in the Cleve hurdle, but I'd say signs are that he's probably coming back to himself a bit. But I'd be keen on Tiupu. I do think up and trip is going to be the making of him. There's more improvement to come, and yeah, he's the one I have inside for the stayers anyway at the moment.
Okay, some real interest in him then in the Galmoy Hurdle. It'll be intriguing to see what he can do in that event. Then on to the weekend, Barry, and we'll focus on you here for Cheltenham, where we've got this bumper 9-race card. Obviously a couple of rescheduled races, but we've got the Cotswold Chase and the Cleve Hurdle, as well as the Clarence House, which we spoke about obviously last week. That's the rescheduled race from Ascot, so you can go back and listen to our thoughts from last week if you fancy it. So we, Barry, will just focus on the Cotswold Chase and the Cleve. Obviously the Cotswold Chase with sort of basically the best of the Brits in terms of the Gold Cup betting in Protectorat, Ahoy Signor, and then Noble Yates looks to come over for this as well, due to the fact that he missed his intended target at Lingfield. It's going to be a fascinating renewal, and they've all got something to prove, really, maybe except Noble Yates, in fairness. But Protectorat and Ahoy Signor, we want to see Protectorat sort of relish Cheltenham, and Ahoy Signor, well, he really is on the retrieval mission now.
Well, he's definitely on a retrieval mission. But no, for me, I think Protectorat probably has the least to prove. He was third in the Gold Cup. I thought he put up a really strong performance in the Betfair Chase. He won, that was on soft ground. He also won the Many Clouds last year on soft ground, really impressive. Noble Yates put in a good performance winning the Many Clouds, but this is his first run in a Grade 1. So he's stepping into proper top drawer company here. I think he'll have it to do to beat Protectorat, who's proven at this level. So for me, I'd be sweet on Protectorat. Maybe Noble Yates will surprise me and be a Grade 1 contender, but he has to step up on what he's done to date. He beat Dashel Drasher 4 lengths in Aintree. I think he's going to have to be a lot better than that to beat Protectorat.
Okay, that is interesting. Intriguing. The Cleve Hurdle, Paisley Park, Dashel Drasher, old favourite, Gelino Bello in there, one of the younger contingents for this race. Who do you fancy in that, Barry? Just a quick line here.
I think we've seen a better version of Paisley Park this year. He was second to Champion Newbury in his first run. He usually struggles on his first run. He was only touched off, and then he goes and wins in Kempton, a track he should hate. So I think we're seeing a better version of Paisley Park this year. He was third in this race last year after giving a head start. He loves it around Cheltenham. He loves conditions. No, I think he's a good bit against the opposition.
And we should also mention the Triumph Hurdle Trial, Barry, because in that we've got 2 horses coming there, hopefully, that bring in pretty good lines of form and have had good seasons, Comfort Zone and Scriptwriter. Those are just 2 that I've mentioned. Who would you fancy in that race?
Yeah, exactly. I think Scriptwriter is a horse who's still on the up, and he only beat Perseus way 2.5 lengths, and Comfort Zone the same, and Comfort Zone was 6 lengths behind Lossy Mode, so you have a good line of form. But the other big one on there, the Clarence House, I know we discussed it before on last week's show, but it's a different race this week. It's going to be on the new course around Cheltenham on very soft ground. You've got extra runners in there as well, so you have Editor de Geet, who's potentially going to take on an Orgamine up front. That shows a different pace angle to the race, and Orgamine won't get the luxury of coasting along at his own pace. I think that's going to play to Edward Stone's strength, and there could be value in Edward Stone to take on an Orgamine on the new course where there's more emphasis on stamina. I think the old course, which would be the normal Champion Chase course, much sharper track, the speed element there would play to an Orgamine's strength. So for me, I think he could be opposable, and there could be value in Edwardson maybe.
Oh, bit of a turnaround on what, well, given the change of location, obviously, I think that's pretty fair. But yeah, some different views to the ones we had last week. So I'm sorry for just lazily throwing viewers back to last week on that one. And we need to mention Doncaster, Barry, because not only do we have the Sky Bet Chase up at Doncaster with some interesting entries, but we also have the Off the Fence Lightning Novices Chase. We have a race named after us. It's actually... go and watch Off the Fence on YouTube, I think. Lightning Novices Chase, but still, we're in the race title. We won't be complaining about that, will we, Barry?
I think it's the feature, Vanessa, I thought, but it's a competitive race this year. On the entries, Boot Hill is there, obviously good form with John Bond, Tommy's Oscar as well, very smart performer too, so there's plenty of quality there. So we'll definitely have to keep an eye out for that one.
Yeah, fascinating. And don't forget also, hopefully we'll see Epatton in the Yorkshire Rose as well. She missed her intended target at Haydock. So this, if weather permits, which it should do looking at the forecast, could be a brilliant weekend of racing up and down the country, Cheltenham, Doncaster, other locations too. And we have rattled through a little bit of a preview there. Don't forget you can watch all the action from Doncaster live on Sky Sports Racing. Don't miss out on that. But that about wraps up the show. God, time flies when we're having fun, which is what we are doing on this show. Boys, thank you very much as always for your contributions. Viewers, thank you as always for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe, give us a like, give us a retweet, give us your feedback. We want it all. Thank you very much. But for now, thank you very much for watching. That was Off the Fence.